What is going on, everyone? I'm here with my buddy Paul, and I'm very excited to talk to him. We work together at HashiCorp. He's no longer at HashiCorp, but he has got kind of an amazing collection of skills and experiences, and kind of an amazing mix of like programming, infrastructure, and DevOps stuff. And there's even some entrepreneurship in there. Um, Paul, do you want to like? I'm not asking for like an elevator pitch, but do you want to just like quickly kind of say what you kind of do in tech and what you're into, and kind of the super high level view of kind of your where you are right now, and kind of how you got there.
Sure, super high level. I started out as a sysadmin back when DevOps was starting to become a term, which was more of let's everyone just get together or work together and not throw code over the wall. And then also there's the dovetail of codify your infrastructure. So started as a sysadmin. I was lucky to have a really great CTO at the time who was my friend's brother, who kind of mentored me as like had me learning Ruby, Rails, um, and Chef was just taking off. He's like, hey, you should go learn this thing, Chef. It looks interesting. He's actually always been really good about finding the tech that's going to take off. His name's Robert Jackson. He's actually on the Ember core team now. But he's actually one of the people who helped me get started, one of my first tech jobs. And then sysadmin, and then decided programming looked more fun. So got into Ruby on Rails development, became an engineering manager for a couple of years, and then went back to being an IC because the thing I liked most about engineering manager was mentoring, and you can do that at a senior and lead level. So went back to that, and now I'm somewhere in between writing code and doing DevOps infrastructure stuff.
So the beginning of your career track kind of mirrors mine, where it's like you kind of show up knowing some Linux, some scripting, some programming, and then you kind of meet a mentor who's like opens the world of programming and kind of more to you. Did you have sort of a mentor mentee kind of relationship with this dude who kind of inspired you or motivated you to learn Ruby and Rails and all that stuff?
It was mainly, they needed some sysadmin help, and I was actually came as a my first technical job was a low level network tech, like running cables and basic router switch configurations for a college. And I was trying to break into something not tech level, and they're like, oh yeah, it was an hour drive every day or one way drive, but he's like, we could use some help with tech support, sysadmin stuff, and it was kind of the kind of environment where you'd be like, okay, like we need this, go take some time to read it, and while balancing like front user requests and stuff, but it was generally like, hey, we need to set up some VMs for terminal servers, or and then if I get stuck, we me and my friend who was his brother would go hang out in his office and we chat about coding or like a technical problem or stuff we could do.
Super
So it
cool.
was it was a little bit of, yeah, mostly here's some stuff to go work on. But then when I got stuck, or he had an open door, I could come in and ask, like, how would you do this type deal.
It has a how big is that company? It has that small company feel the way you're talking about it.
The small company it was only the CTO, me and my friend, and then one other woman who was she maintained the VB.net app. So I guess it was four of us. I think the company as a whole was maybe 40 people max.
Yeah.
Um, I don't even know if it reached that. It eventually got bought out, and I think everyone left. But yeah.
It's interesting. That's exactly my first kind of company size, and I love that. I think I really lucked out in that because it's sort of this sweet spot for getting to do a little bit of everything, because a company of 30 people with like maybe five or six tech people in it doing something tech focused um, is almost always like perpetually shorthanded with stuff, and so like that's such an incredible opportunity to always, if you're the person who's like, oh, I'll go learn that, like your manager will love you because they don't have to like make somebody go learn a whole thing just to do a project. Um, and for you, it's you can sort of pick and choose your projects and what's most interesting to you. I apologize for that trash truck. That's
Yeah,
pretty
it was pretty interesting. I mean, it was, really small. We were also didn't really have much of a budget. So we were running Linux KVM servers that were running Windows terminal servers for the end users. Two of us had MacBooks. I went with throwing Linux on a desktop, and it was actually surprisingly easy to. It worked really well. Just it made it easier to work with everyone else on Macs, and then yeah, the moments when you needed to talk to the other Mac users or connect to Windows servers was pretty surprisingly really well, but even back then.
Yeah, that's cool. Were there any kind of like standout projects that you did back then that really kind of like helped you dive into some new technology that panned out for you later career wise? I mean, it sounds like the Ruby on Rails thing was probably a
For
big.
sure.
Is there anything else like that?
Exposure to Ruby and Rails, they actually had a app that had been it started as a Rails 1 beta app and got upgraded every year. So at that time, I don't know what version it was at,
It's
3.
between 2 and 3 at that point.
Yeah, so we had a Rails app that started as 1 and was at the newest 3 at the time. Honestly, the thing I learned most was Chef. The project was to, DevOps was taking off, automating servers, um, make them repeatable. So pretty much writing Chef. This was early Chef. This was 0.10, just off the line. Like 0.9 was still out in the wild. It was an interesting time in the Chef community, but the Chef community then was really welcoming. Um, Everyone was just trying to figure it out. Everyone was running Ruby. Not the best way to learn a programming language, but I definitely got to experience to learn Ruby, like Ruby standard lib, because you didn't have access to all of Active Record or Active Support or any of those gems. It was just what can you throw together with standard lib. But Ruby's pretty good in that it's got everything you need for scripting that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it can totally be a sort of Perl or something. You can use it like that, just like do a whole bunch of string mutating and in one liners. um
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah, getting Chef built out and deployed was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Where did you kind of go from there? And what were you kind of thinking at that point in your career, like where you wanted to go?
After that, I actually moved to just outside of Tampa, St. Pete for a couple of years, worked for another small company in the travel insurance industry. Learned a bunch there, met some actually still friends today. It was almost going on 8, 10 years ago. Um, the and there I was mainly doing Chef and Ruby and AWS, supporting Rails applications. This was early AWS too. VPCs weren't even mentioned. I think they just started talking about them when I left that job.
Well,
So it was an interesting early days. We didn't have um, RDS or anything. All the database servers were just EC2 ephemeral instances that we lined up. That was actually the first job I learned about disaster recovery and running playbooks. It was very stressful for younger me to learn how to fail over production databases, but the CTO I worked for was very adamant about learning it. And later I learned that this concept started to solidify in the DevOps community. We had a lot of, not a lot of, but there were a few talks, mainly for people like in their first responder area, either volunteer or had been in that industry. And the idea being that you build your playbook, you constantly run through it. Then you can test it and you can also update it as you're doing it. So when there did become a time when the database failed, it was just muscle memory to run through everything.
yep. Yeah, it's tremendously valuable for that not to be your first time during a disaster, like kind of applying these processes and mechanisms, testing those mechanisms. um Very interesting. Did you is that kind of when you went off and started thinking about trying a management role? What was that? What's
No, I was actually when I was getting more exposure to more Rails apps, made me really interested in Ruby on Rails. To this day, it's still one of my favorite frameworks to get stuff done. Um, until you actually have a scale problem, which Rails can still handle if you do it right. It's really great for it gets out of your way for getting a business problem solved. So it was a couple Rails apps, and then I really wanted to take a stab at it. So at night I would go through I think it was Rails tutorial back then. Rails cast was still a thing, so I ended up just going to the tutorials and trying to make my own app. I think the first one I tried to make was there's a service called CloudKick, which was ahead of its time. It was bought out by Rackspace and killed off, but it was back then. I think you used this too. There was Nagios, and the problem with Nagios is it was the server has to know about the clients, so you would be in this weird state. Chef helped a lot, where it would reach out and try and discover them, and then render all the stuff and restart the Nagios server.
yeah.
But CloudKick was to my knowledge, one of the first ones to do where the client where the clients actually check in to the server, and then it can deprovision them later, which was big when you started using EC2 and stuff. It became less painful.
Yep.
But they had this really cool feature where you could actually just send like this general log that everyone, especially if you were distributed or someone got woken up in the night, you'd be like, yeah, I bounced the server. And it was that idea was kind of, which is still something I haven't really seen taken off yet, with the idea of making entry logs. I guess Datadog kind of has
Yeah,
something a
if
little
on
similar.
an incident, you can kind of comment, or you can resolve it with a note essentially.
Yeah.
But
But I always thought like
like
some
that.
type of long running log for infrastructure, especially when you're a distributed team, is really cool. So that service got taken down, and I ended up trying to like mimic it with not the monitoring part, just the log part with the
Yeah.
basic Rails app. And that was you just pick a project and just try and hammer it out, just trying to test a few things, which actually ended up being I interviewed when I moved on to be a Rails developer. The company, the InfoSec company I went to go work for, they found that project on my GitHub, and that was my technical interview. Was, oh, we found this project. Let's add a feature to
Oh, that's
your little
so
app.
cool.
Yeah, it was actually really
That
clever.
is a great kind of interview. Like that's actually a good interview.
Yeah, that was a really clever idea.
Work
One
on
of
a
my good
project
friends
like
from
this.
there now, Stephen Ball, actually. It's interesting. You can kind of see the time through your career, the people that made good influences. And Stephen Ball taught me a lot about Git and being calm during certain incidents. But I would say my Git skills leveled up after working with him. He's actually, we'll have to throw some notes in, but he gave a talk years ago and has a blog post called Deliberate Git, which I reference often. It's trying to make everyone more calm about, you could do a bunch of work in progress commits, and then uh, you know teach people how to rebase, and that it's not scary. So it's a really great. He's also really good about let's be intentional with our commit messages, so you can actually know what's happening, as opposed to like, but why did you change this thing 2 years ago?
Yeah. Um, there's a project called what is it? Sublime Merge. And it's the Sublime text people sort of taking a crack at a Git client. I'm kind of interested to start using it because I wonder if it graphically exposes some of Git's features that we should use that are just not super intuitive to new people. Like you're
Yeah.
talking about, like rebasing is a scary thing, or balancing a bunch of different in progress commits and then like stashing them, or working on multiple branches at the same time. You said the most something that rings so true with me, which is um, working on projects and kind of that there's this sort of fault line. I feel like just right as you go from kind of beginner developer to a real developer is it's that moment when you start doing your own projects from scratch, even if they're just very small ideas. I feel like personally I could program. I knew the building blocks of a Turing complete programming language before that, and I was able to read code and like make little changes. But the moment at which it really took off for me is when I did a larger project from scratch. And it kind of sounds like kind of before this Rails job, um, that's kind of what you were striking out and kind of solving your own problems with a full-fledged project that you did from scratch, not a tutorial, not a follow along, not like another Twitter clone from a blog post. It's like a real thing that you made up yourself. And for me, that's always the place where you really learn a language, or the first time you do it, you really learn how to program when you're doing that. Do you have
Yeah,
anything
I
to?
think the two the 2 points to that, I at the time was going through the Rails blog tutorial, and then what was it? I think it's called Rails tutorial. I don't remember the name.
Yeah,
You
the one
remember
that's
the
like the
Michael
open
Hartle?
source book. Is that the
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had those. I'd have those in two tabs, and I would have my idea, and you just follow through like, oh, I need to post this thing back, or I
Yes.
need to write a table,
Exactly.
or I need to do a thing, and I'd try and find it in those two tutorials, and then copy it, and then get it to work, fight with it. Yeah, and I think the other thing is also finding projects, sometimes just rewriting projects that exist, not to actually put it out in the world, but just to practice. I find that helpful because then you can find other open source projects like, I need to do X, how, and kind of be like, I think I would do it this way, and then go look at a couple other projects like posting data back to something, and you go peek at like another Rails app and say like, oh, okay, I was right, or oh, that's interesting, or I need to find a user's, I don't know, find something. And it's always interesting to, take a stab at it. Or if you get stuck, you can go look at an open source project and say like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, it's
Yeah.
not as hard as I thought. This
Yeah.
is a clever idea.
That's
But if you're taking a lot of code, make sure to attribute it in a comment or
yeah.
something.
Or never publish that thing.
Yeah, or never publish it.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's this inflection point where, and you just said it, it's like where you go from primarily copying, where line for line something and changing some of the names or strings or whatever, that's like the beginner programming mode, at to primarily trying to execute your own idea or your attempt at building something that already exists, and then referencing as needed the like existing art.
I always say the next step after that, kind of like, I guess if we could like draw out the different points, there was
Yeah.
that you get the idea, there's if statements and stuff, and then you go and try and write your own projects. And then the next step I would say is like really learning development practices and design decisions. The thing I would say, like the next point in my career, I would say what I leveled up was taking Sandy Metz's course.
Yes.
She
that object-oriented design book changed how I think about programming to this day.
Same way. I feel like once I closed the cover, after I finished that book, sometimes technical books are hard to get through, but that one was pretty easy to get through in a week or two. And
it's all about
when
bicycles.
I finished it,
it's great.
Yeah, exactly. And once I finished that, I was like, wow, I feel like my brain is different now. I feel like I can see code differently. And then after that, the job I was at the time actually brought Sandy Metz in for one of her courses, and all the engineers, got to take it. And that was also a really great course because it kind of built on top of that book, and it was how to break things apart, and more importantly how to slowly test something. Like you're trying to refactor some code, or you're trying to do something. It's even better if it has some tests. Then you can the idea is like make small changes, do a thing, run a test, hit a break, reverse it, just figure out what happened, and like just really incrementally. And then also don't get too attached to your code. Throw it out, start over. I would definitely attribute Sandy Metz's material to the next step in changing my career. And she also had a lot of great resources. I think Gang of Four, and she referenced a lot of pretty popular books. I think just going on her site and finding the different things she uses to kind of distill that information. But yeah, Sandy Metz is kind of takes you to the next level.
Love it. Yeah, I remember having that. It's true. The number of books that gave me that experience are rare. It's like, it's funny. I have two of them right here from the infrastructure side. The Unix and Linux System Administration Handbook, it was a book that loved Unix and Linux just as much as I did as a beginner, but at a professional level. And that is what makes it amazing. This one, Cloud System Administration.
I still use it as a reference sometimes. The other one, I don't know if it was before that, the WebOps one by John, I think it was Allspaw. I don't know if it was the early days of how to take it from a server to, caching and and then add load balancers, and
Yep.
then make sure you have a database backup plan.
Yep. And whole like operational things that are not super technical, like logging and alerting
Yeah.
and like those types of things. Yeah, so those two, the Sandy Metz book, and I want to say like the Little Schemer taught me how to think recursively, how to decompose problems recursively.
I still need to read that. That's still on my list.
It's a good one. It's a good one. I paired it with learning Clojure. They use Scheme obviously in it, and it was a great. I mean, I literally, I was in the right kind of environment too. I had just taken this sort of, I had read a bunch of Tim Ferriss, like Tim Ferriss's first book, The 4 Hour Work Week, and I was like, I'm doing my first mini retirement. Like I had a tech job for a few years. Like I'm gonna move to Europe, and just my project will be become a programmer, like truly learn programming. And yeah, so I had this environment where just for 8 hours a day, I could sit in a room totally uninterrupted. I had my like savings account that I was slowly draining for kebabs and beer, and was just totally focused on working through the little schemer. Pro tip: do it on paper with a pencil. It completely changed how quickly I learned and how like intuitively I still feel recursion and like splitting things apart and bringing them back together. And yeah,
Interesting.
it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to. I think that's on my epic to read list. I functional
Yeah.
programming is kind of the next thing I'd like to spend time learning. I went through the Elixir book, and it kind of gave me that happy feeling that Ruby does, and Elixir is definitely it was interesting because they solved web scale before it was the web even existed. Like Erlang, what Elixir is built on is just they have it all sorted out. They were like, yeah, we can take all the traffic you need. I mean, that's how WhatsApp was built, was some FreeBSD servers and some Erlang servers, and they were moving millions of messages around.
It's a super interesting model. I took the yeah, Elixir is like I have seen Erlang before, and I was like, no, I don't care how cool it is.
Yeah.
No. Um, and you ever read a rabbit config? It's not pretty. But yeah, Elixir just as essentially a language on top of that feels yeah, it has that happy feeling, like you said. It has that happy Ruby feeling where like, ooh, like this is nice and it's readable and it's simple and it's powerful. I can do interesting things with this. That's cool. I only did like the intro tutorial, but I enjoyed it. That's cool. Yeah. You
Yeah,
have a cool,
definitely something I'd like to spend more time doing.
yeah. What other cool stuff is on your list?
Oh my
I want to
gosh,
know for myself.
the list is ongoing. I have like a
Yeah.
Trello board going that's pretty epic.
Same. Oh, that's great. Evernote.
We should. I always feel like I'm getting more experience with Go. The different, as different places have it, but Go has a nice little niche.
Mhm.
We've talked about this. It's if you don't have to do state and you want to do embedded or not embedded, local stuff, or like obviously the HashiCorp tools like Console and Terraform, it's really great for those. But when it starts doing web stuff, working with databases, then it's like, oh, I'd rather use Rails or Django for this.
Interesting.
Maybe Elixir. And what is distributed systems? That's the stuff I'd really like to get more into. Distributed systems, the open tracing stuff I've gotten to play with, I think
Cool.
would be interesting to dive into more. I think we've talked about this. Datadog has some stuff. You have to plug it into your infrastructure, but being able to trace stuff through is really great when you've got a bunch of apps and everything's in production.
Yeah.
And you just want to figure out where it's failing if you have a couple services talking to each other.
Yeah, once you have that stuff tagged up and actually together, so like your traces you can find related logs, and then you can get host metrics or anything else you're monitoring. That is when yeah, that's when it becomes incredibly powerful. I can't imagine anymore living without that type of tracing functionality. It's like, it's just, yeah, for real production stuff, being able to look at your error budget and be like, huh, this one's over. Look at the most common errors that are pushing it over your error budget, for that service. Look at, okay, what endpoint, like what requests are failing and what are the most common failures. Then look at related logs. Then look at what's going on in the, it's just like, how would you have trouble shot this before. Is it troubleshot? That's a strange word.
Yeah, that is a strange word.
Yeah,
How would
I
you
can't even
troubleshoot?
imagine doing it. It's like, I guess a lot of print line stuff or more logging, like that you're not going to look at
Yeah,
anyway because there's too many logs. 80 million logs a day. It's like, what
yeah,
is more logging going to do?
I think, I think, Krista at work at HashiCorp, like we chatted and we realized that, there's just sometimes there's no good substitute for Prince debugging.
Yeah.
When you're in an isolated system, like that's a classic, it'll never go away. But being able to debug it when you can't figure out which service is falling down is difficult. That's where the tracing comes in. It'll be really interesting to see that space take off.
Yeah.
Our career is just so immense and complex. It's crazy. So getting to, you know, you could get into open tracing for a while. You could get into distributed systems. Everything kind of dovetails into each other. But it'll be interesting to see where tracing goes in the future.
I sort of forgot to ask you, how do you have a degree, like a university degree, and is that in something technical?
Yeah, so technically, yes. I got this is, I think we're close to the same age. I was out of high school in the mid 2000s, which was a rough time to be trying to break into tech. And I grew up in a very small city, which didn't have a lot of tech jobs. So my original plan, I was actually working full time while going to school, community college, which community college is great, especially in America because it's cheaper. And the teachers tend to have more real world experience to apply things to. But I was actually working during the day, sales and shipping for a metalworking company, which was really fascinating because working for a place that does manufacturing and got exposed to CNCs. Fun story on that. It was very small, and the owner taught himself everything, engineering and programming. He actually, I'm sure it's changed. Like I think the company's still around, but I'm sure they've upgraded. But at that time, we had an access database that had thousands of lines of VB script code to take orders, print invoices, do shipping labels, all this stuff. And it was me and two other people. And it was really interesting because you could only write certain things to the database. You can only have one person lock the access database, so
Oh,
people can't hit submit at the same time. But
yeah.
it was a multi-million-dollar company, and it's always a fun story of being like, tech can do different things for different places. And sometimes it's an access database that's helping $1 million metalworking company ship tools.
Yep.
Um, Anyways, on that tangent, yeah, back to my educational background. I was working full time, going to community college for business, and the plan was to also try and get a comp sci degree because around that time, if you wanted to get into tech, everyone was saying, "Oh, you also have to do business." Um, the the issue with that was I also wasn't very I didn't feel comfortable enough in math to pass a lot of the engineering stuff, and I was kind of burning out. And right around that time, schools were starting to offer the computer information systems degree, CIS, which was you essentially take business classes and then comp sci IT classes. So it's kind of applied business, which always interested me because the whole taking tech and then making things more streamlined, making processes easier. So if that's what our career has been based on. If you automate something, now you don't have to spend your day working on that. You can go focus on harder problems. And that's the whole
Yeah.
kind of the root of all technology is let's automate some things so we can work on more interesting and harder problems as we go.
Yep.
So my undergrad was in computer information systems, and I got a graduate degree in computer information systems. A lot of it was online. If it wasn't for online school, I wouldn't have a degree because I was working full time. So yeah, computer information systems, which was just applied IT to business.
Such a great, yeah, I think you're right. I think people coming off of like a very pure like math with a comp sci minor or something degree are probably very shocked and disappointed when they hit the real world, for which a degree like you're talking about probably prepares you much better. Saying that
Oh,
your degree probably prepares you a lot more for the real world and the sort of the idea that good enough is a thing that exists, and like a metalworking company can survive on a database that only one person can write to at a time with no real serialization abstraction in front of it. Uh, Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I imagine a comp sci person would tweak on that problem for weeks to try to hand build some like bad version of what Postgres or something does, um, instead of just being like, this is probably fine for now. I can go solve a different problem, or yeah, something
Yeah,
that's occurred
and
in the
it's
business.
interesting because our field is so diverse, and there's definitely a place. We definitely need people who major in comp sci, electrical engineering,
Yeah,
because they're the ones who are going to go build embedded devices or make satellites. But then there's also, I think, a lot of programmers end up where we're at, and it's good to take a business class, or a philosophy class or an ethics class, so you understand the impact in the real world.
yep, yeah. And for what it's worth, I'm not poo-pooing, more theoretical computer science. For me personally, it's been a skill or a sort of skill set that I have regretted not getting all in one dose quickly, because it's a
Yeah,
hard
same.
skill set to
Yeah.
build and takes a lot of math and other stuff. But I I think I've benefited more from every drop of that I've absorbed, because I have so much practical. Uh, my sort of knowledge graph is large enough that there's so many nodes I can hang additional knowledge on now, that actually makes it make sense. So, for every computer science like thing that I learn, I know I can already smell the applications of it, or remember problems that I had that might have been solved by it. Um, so
Yeah.
I feel like I just remember that stuff way better once I learn it. Although, yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to be learning it for another 20 years instead of getting that basic stuff done in 4 or 6 years.
Yeah, I think that's what's great though, is we get paid to keep learning, which
Yeah.
is kind of the dream.
Yep. That actually is a great segue to one of these questions that I'm asking everyone. And that is, if you were starting over today from zero with the idea you want to get into tech, what for you would be the kind of path that you would take to quickly get on the road to where you are now? Like, what would in your mind an efficient way right now of getting into the industry be?
That's really tough. I actually know people who are trying to break into programming, and some other semi-related things. And unfortunately, in our system now, businesses are still, oh, we need people, but they're not willing to give people a chance to get that experience. Junior people just want to get a job and get some experience. And I remember being a junior, I would have happily taken basic pay just to get the exposure and then move on. But unfortunately, companies don't do that. So that's kind of hard. I guess assuming I had things lined up where it was a little bit easier to get started. I don't know if I would change a lot. It was definitely not easy, but my path has been great because I got exposure to ops and developments and a little bit of business. So it was it's kind of nice having the big picture. I think if I would change one thing, I grew up in a very small town, during a time when tech wasn't that cool. Uh, and there wasn't a lot of techies in my town. So try and find people interested in tech and other people, could collaborate with. Definitely spend more time with programming languages. I didn't actually start programming until after college. I thought I just always wanted to be a sysadmin.
Yeah,
And then that the first CTO I worked for kind of got me into it. I realized I really enjoy programming, and it kind of takes you to the next level of system administration when you
yeah,
can automate a lot of stuff, or I have to do something with all the users. I don't want to sit here and do this to 40, 100, 300 users. I want to write a script that's going to run through and do all this.
exactly.
And it also makes you think about, how can I automate this stuff so I don't, especially if I have to do this a second time or a third time or once a month. Yeah, I don't know if I would take a change too much. I think the
Yeah,
biggest thing would try and find some peers, and then spend more time on a programming language.
I think it's a great call out. Until you mentioned it, I hadn't really thought about it, but one of the things that has motivated me to learn the fastest and have the most fun doing it has been doing it with friends. Working on just dumb projects with friends, or cool projects with friends that we thought were going to make us rich. Um,
Yeah,
there's there's just so much like motivation you don't notice. It's a lot of it is like, how do you swallow the very bitter learning pill, because real learning is often just very difficult and time consuming. It's smashing your head against a bug for 3 hours. It's Googling a lot and getting really good at finding answers from 7 years ago and then thinking, does this still apply to this version of the programming language or whatever? And if you're hanging out with friends doing that, it's way more fun and easy. The
Yeah, for
time
sure.
just those 10,000 hours or whatever, abstract number you want to like throw at learning something well, they fly by a lot faster. And yeah, if you're anywhere that's, I think even in small cities now, you have the blessing of things like Meetup, where you can just find a community of people that is close to you that is interested in some of the same stuff and that can help you get psyched up with them about it. That's just
Yeah,
great advice.
the internet's making it a little bit easier. In the future, maybe people will meet and share a screen on Discord or something. But yeah, definitely the friendships has been great. Meeting people like during my career, like as we become friends and stuff, it's been great to get that exposure, and it kind of takes you next level because you chat about problems or
Yeah,
just oh, let's schedule a coffee time even though we live in two different places, jump on a call and discuss the problems we're working on and get a different perspective because everyone's got a different background and has seen different problems.
exactly. uh Takes me to the next thing, which is, what right now do you find, what exactly is sort of your day-to-day right now, and what tech and stuff does that involve, and what are the things that you find most interesting about that current work, not just technically necessarily?
Hmm. I think at my current job, I switched from, not switched, but software engineering. Now I've stepped back into platform engineering at my current company. And our team is kind of taking a big picture look of, because the company is going on 20 years now, but they're pretty good about still keeping up with the tech and keeping things updated. And so our team's main goal is to ask why we're doing something and how can we make it automated if it still needs to exist, how can we improve it or upgrade it. We're also we're helping on the infrastructure side, but we also work with making things more streamlined for the developers on all the different product teams. I think the stuff I enjoy now, especially, is finding the problems and how things, why does it exist? How can we make this better? How can we simplify it? A lot of times we're finding different projects that still need to be maintained and asking, does it need to be this complicated? Can we make it easier? Can we decrease the tech stack? And then automating it or finding wise. I think the best part is asking why and then seeing how you can improve it to make it easier, because this, as you get more into this, it's becomes less about being clever and tying a bunch of stuff together and more about how can we make this simpler so 6 months from now I know what's happening here because we have so many projects going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so getting to write software but also getting to work with the infrastructure side, and then some of it applies to the automating the process to make everyone's life a little bit better.
Yeah, that's, I think, such a great insight. So much of my thinking when I was younger in this industry was like, how can I become more smart and clever and do, wily feats of tech magic, to save the day. And as I've gotten older, I realize it's more of like, how can I become a good steward or like a gardener of complexity and abstraction so that people people around me, including me in 6 months, have an easy time running the system and having our intuition about it match up to like how it really behaves under stress. And that is it's yeah, half tech, half like it becomes its own art, uh of like, but yeah, those priorities, simplicity, kind of like practical, keeping something simple, beautiful, intuitive, it's really hard to do, and it takes a lot of experience and a lot of doing the wrong stuff at some point in your career and feeling that pain so that you can recognize, you know when you're starting to do that again, like, oh no, the comments in this are really bad, or the logging is really badly done, like this is going to hurt us, like you can feel that after a while, whereas a new person is just like, I don't know, like we don't need those logs right now. So
Yeah, I think the other big thing is trying to maintain projects with good Git history so people in the future know what's going on. And we actually, my team just realized this yesterday is, someone pinged us like, hey, we need to move this thing because it's going to cost a lot of money with the number of polls it does with Docker or Docker Hub. And we were chatting and like, okay, we pull up in the project and it says, this is an app we need to pull this service every minute for the data. And you're like, okay, I get that. I can see that by looking at the code, but why does this project exist? So now we're talking about adding a blurb on every README we come across on every project of why does this project exist? Because a lot of stuff is,
Great.
Especially when the company's older, you write it, you automate it, and then it goes off into the wild. And occasionally, you have tools like Dependabot that update the requirements. But if people circle back to it in 6 months because it's just something basic that doesn't need a lot of attention, you're like, why are we doing it like this? Why can't we just do X? Why can't we just cache the response? Sometimes you can't cache the response. It'd be good to put why you can't do that in the README.
Yep. That's great. On that note, what are some things like that you think people new to the industry neglect, like skills or things like that only later become sort of apparent as really important stuff?
I think a couple things. Debugging skills are huge. No matter how much you learn, whether it's formal education or teaching yourself, learning how to break down problems and really, maybe it's putting put statements all the way through the code until you figure out where it's dropping, or maybe it's, where do you find logs? Almost everything. Well, the nice thing for us, right, like in working with Linux, is almost everything logs somewhere, and you can find that log, and hopefully there's information in it. Julia Evans, her content's pretty popular. She's got a lot of great posts on debugging, which are also great just to hear. Like, oh, okay, I am doing it more like some of the people I consider to be better at this. Like she does a lot of great stuff. And you're like, oh, okay, I can do this just like her. She is doing a lot of similar things I do, and sometimes she'll give stuff like, have you considered doing this when you're debugging? So I would say the answer is one of them is debugging. Just constantly trying to get better on how can you break down a problem. I think when we're working together at HashiCorp did get right is the RFC process, because then you break down the problem, why it exists, the different solutions you thought to try and do, why they worked or didn't work, and then you can get feedback from other people who have experience. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand, especially when it's a tougher problem, just stopping and writing every step you've taken and how you got to that point. And probably the other big thing is empathy. We can joke like, oh, why did this person put this code like that and everything, but being empathetic for end users and teammates and people before us, which I guess we've kind of found that the RFC is nice because you can be like, why did we do this solution? And you can go back and see what the state of the world was when you wrote the RFC. And it's like, oh, we didn't use this service because it didn't exist 2 years ago.
Yep. Yeah, that empathy bit is huge. I think it's one of the things that separates people that I want to work with and enjoy working with from people that I do not enjoy working with. And it's that I think in tech, in some ways, it's like a math problem. When you solve something, it seems so incredibly obvious that is the right way to do it because it's working well, even though, and then we all sort of forget that a week before it was not apparent at all. And it was a solution that we had to kind of engineer and get feedback for and work towards and build and test and change before it was so obviously right. I think that like instinct that's in there is exactly like the first thing you said, where you read some code and you're like, who wrote this shit? This is unbelievable. I mean, this is just dumb. Like this is just a dumb piece of code. And it's easy to have that thought, however fleeting, without any of that empathy and understanding. That's like the people that I like working with, either have much less of that thought, or their first thought is like, oh, why was this done? Like, I want to understand why this seemed necessary. Like, yes, of course, there's bugs, there's mistakes, etc. But they tend to not assign like what they think someone's intelligence is based on some code that was written years ago. um yeah, it's like not making that a personal thing.
Yeah, like everyone's trying to do their best. Well, we assume everyone's trying to do their best most of the
yeah,
time. Um,
that's
and
it. You
that's,
have to assume that everyone's
yeah.
doing their best. That's like, that's just part of it.
I think the only other those are two, the debugging and the empathy are kind of the two things. If I could add a third, it would be learn the other side. If you're, we're kind of in the middle ground with, we do code, we write code and we do ops. But if you're into ops, learn a little bit of programming. If you're in programming, learn a little bit of ops, just so you can get an idea for the big picture, but also you can collaborate with your teammates on the other side. And which was the original point of DevOps, right? It wasn't really a writing code. It was everyone collaborating and getting that stuff together, which I kind of empathize with a lot. I
Absolutely.
mean, I am a Linux person. Like when I learned Linux, I fell in love with it because it's everything as a file, and it can be as secure as you want. It can be as flexible as you want. Um, I don't know if I could go back to Windows administration, but yeah, the great thing about learning Linux is then, I guess we got lucky. Linux kind of took off and
Yeah,
has been the de facto standard for SaaS and server administration now.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we'll get to that later, but yes, luck is also a huge part of it.
Yeah.
One of the things that Erin said when I was interviewing her was, I just thought it was so true, is I was sort of like, oh, how would you go? How would you start again from zero? And she said, um, oh, like there's literally like, you can't really plan a tech career very well,
Yeah.
because things change over the years so incredibly fast, and entire skill sets that are paying huge dividends now simply will not. And yeah, of course, there's always principles, but it takes a lot of time to learn, to apply those same principles that you already know to a brand new set of tools, um, and ways of doing infrastructure, and like sort of best practices for whether you're programming or doing infrastructure, where it's just an incredibly quickly moving industry. And so having super rigid plans is often just
Yeah.
a bad idea.
Yeah. I guess I've started to realize that too, actually, is, pick some stuff you're interested in. You kind of got to balance between doing the stuff that keeps you excited still, and then the um, doing stuff that makes you excited, but also stuff that's, you can still get paid and pay your bills. We've gotten lucky that, the path we picked, programming and cloud, that kind of took off. But actually, yeah, once you get a few years, there's most tech jobs pay pretty well now. And hopefully most people get a little bit of time to, explore different stuff that makes them interested, whatever that is.
Yeah, it's a real buffet. And um, yeah, even a plan that sounds as straightforward as, I will graduate with a comp sci degree and then go work for a FANG company. Uh, there's actually, as soon as you look at that with more than like 10 seconds of I don't know, focus, you realize even that is a much more nuanced thing, where you have a tremendous choice of where to specialize, of what your interests are. Do you want to really focus on storage? Do you really want to focus on networking? Do you really want to focus on, like managing at large legacy software projects? Do you want, there's just so much in there. Um, Speaking of managing, I know we're sort of butting up against time, but are you, what was that like, your experience getting into management? Like what prompted that? And uh, what was that like for those of us, including me, who have never had a management role and are sort of on the IC side, the individual contributor side?
I think it was interesting. I was at a smaller company, I was like number 55 or something at the time. That was the one I came in as a software engineer. And because of my background in ops, the company, the VP of engineering at the time realized they need a team just dedicated to DevOps. And they offered me the position to build out a team, which was great. I hired a lot of great people, most of which I'm still friends with today. It was interesting. I think it can be done well if you have the support, but sometimes growing startups is not always the best place to do engineering management. And you also have to realize you're probably never going to write code again, and you have to be okay with that. And I honestly missed the technical bit of it. So I realized also that thankfully, you can move back to an IC and more or less make similar money as being a manager. The pivot back is hard, but once you pivot back to being an IC, you can still do the things. Like the part I enjoyed most was mentoring, or helping people work through problems. And I would rather be an IC as a senior or a lead engineer and do that. You do get more exposure to the business side of everything. So why things are happening and decisions are made. Unfortunately, if you're middle management, you don't often get to push back if a VP has decided that they're going to do this thing. And you're like, well, you told me to hire smart people and all of them agree that this is not how we should do it. But you get overridden a lot. So I think the most important thing is shielding your team. Like the job is to shield your team and make sure they have plenty of room to grow as people and engineers. So it can be a little bit stressful depending on the environment. There have been some good books to come out since I've been a manager. I wish they had existed when I was a manager on how to be a good engineering people manager. But yeah,
is that the Camille Fournier like manager's path and those types of things that you're thinking of?
I think so. Yeah, I'll have to look them up afterwards.
So I can add those to the description.
Yeah, it's definitely not for everyone. And if you want to do mentoring and help guide people and do architecture, luckily there are paths now where you can go up to to lead, and I guess some places even have architect and principal now.
Yeah, as you've kind of moved through your career, what are the tech niches and types, the sort of like places in the industry that you have worked in, and what are your kind of impressions of those?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we get to get exposed to different industries and still work with technology. I was mostly in information security and DevOps tools, different industries. I worked at a fishing company for a while, which was actually kind of a dream job because I got into tech because of hacking. When I was younger, the hacking manifesto and just learning things for the sake of learning, not to break stuff, but just how does everything work because of the wonderful complexity of computers. So getting to work in information security was pretty great, and then moved on to work at Chef and HashiCorp. So the DevOps spaces, I would say InfoSec is still fascinating. It's always going to be a great industry. It can be tough and pretty cutthroat. It really depends on the place you get to work at, or what your niche is. InfoSec will always be fascinating. DevOps tools is interesting, working behind the scenes of the stuff you use day to day. It was great. Some of the smartest people I've ever worked with at those companies, but also I have found it more interesting to actually implement the tools than to work on them sometimes.
Yeah, it can feel like you're just gluing together a lot of things in the not ideal cases. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and the pressure of making sure you do stuff that doesn't break everyone else's things can be a little intense. That's why it's important to have beta channels and everything for people to test it.
Yep.
Kind of tying into when we chat about empathy is working at those. I think that's the biggest thing, is working at those DevOps tool places is you only hear about these super edge cases and people get very angry, and people need to have more empathy. Is like, these tools are open source, there's enterprise features for a reason, so we can pair engineers, but please don't say these mean things to these people who are just trying to make these tools make everyone's life better. It makes thousands of our lives easier, a lot of these tools, but there's always that one person who'll say mean things on a GitHub comment. It's like, man, this person's just doing the best they can with the time they have. Be more kind to all those DevOps tools creator, or any tool creator.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly help you get better tools to just like roast people online. Just makes it more likely those tools will slowly go unmaintained. It's not worth the trouble. how as you've kind of, I mean, you've been in a lot of different kind of parts of the industry, companies that are tech driven, that have a tech product, companies that are not, um, as a manager, as an IC, et cetera. What are the, knowing all of this now and having all this experience, what are the cultural kind of markers or hallmarks that you look for now and when evaluating a company overall to see if you want to work for them?
I really like it when I can pair with, or if not necessarily pair, go over, homework solutions. Uh, Places that are okay with you saying, I don't know. That's normally a big red flag if a place assumes you to have a message, an answer for everything. Or I've had interviews when they're like, let's build this whiteboard on how you would build a distributed message system using computer science things. That's actually probably a bad example. I've had interviews with companies that do just whiteboarding comp sci things. Even if I did take those classes, it was 10 years ago and not relevant to the work I'm doing today, or even what the company's doing today. So I think those are kind of warning signs when they don't have more practical, either pairing or like, let's build an app that's kind of similar to what we do, or just build an app to prove that you do it. Like, you really want to find places that know you're there to solve problems. It doesn't matter how you get to that problem.
Yeah.
You're just there to, and you're really easy to work with. People that are kind and empathetic, and like, oh, okay, let's, everyone makes mistakes. I think asking, what happens when an incident happens? What's the postmortem like? Is it blameless? Getting to, I think the other big thing is trying to have some one-on-ones with other engineers and try and get feelers for like, what's the environment like? Is it fast paced because it needs to be, or is it some arbitrary date set by a salesperson? Are they able to cut features without any repercussions, things like that? At my current job, it was interesting to hear that they were going to ship a new feature. It was even at a conference, and the CEO, didn't not angry or anything. He was just like, yeah, I don't feel like this is ready. We're gonna skip that in a demo. And there was no fallout from it. He was just like, oh no, we'll keep baking it. There's no pressure to ship it now. And
Amazing.
Getting some level-headed management is definitely the important thing, I think.
Yeah. It's regardless of how what do they say, how flat the hierarchy is, managers have a tremendous amount of power at companies. And yeah, it's just, they can make or break a place culturally.
Also trying to avoid the needs to be built here. There are a lot of times where it makes more sense to pay a company to do it for you. Why roll your own Datadog when you can pay them money? Or trying to think of another example. Don't roll your own LDAP server. You have Okta now. Don't roll your own PagerDuty. It's cheaper to pay PagerDuty to do all the stuff that they're specializing in, than to spend your engineers' time trying to build that. They would rather, it's better to have them work on problems for your business than to spend time working on something you can outsource and at a fraction of the price for a SaaS tool.
Yeah, the word custom, like when you're being introduced to the infrastructure, is usually like a code smell, like, oh, we built our own custom name of existing product. You're just like, that should be like a warning sign, red flag. Yeah,
for sure.
Interesting. Cool. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you sharing everything. I feel like there's 3 more interviews in just the stuff that we talked about that I want to know more about. But if people have questions, I would encourage them to leave them in the comments for you, and I can pass them to you via Slack and respond with your answers, or you can respond. Thanks for taking the time to do this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. I hope that's been fun and useful. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.